So those of you who watch this channel will know that I'm an absolute critic and quite OCD on even the smallest details. But the fact that I would only change these small elements that are almost not even critical, but are details, shows you how much I believe that this design is beautiful and incredibly well engineered. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed the last couple of episodes. One going to the extreme of showing what masterclass design can turn out to be, and the other one obviously quite controversial. This episode here, we're going to go to another league, a higher level of what we would call design innovation, design engineering innovation. And I think you're going to enjoy it because today we're speaking about the much loved brand Aston Martin and their newest baby, which is the Aston Martin Valhalla. Now, just briefly, I want to look at the original concept model and compare it to the current one, just to see if they've left anything behind or if they've carried something new into it that makes it an even more stunning car than the one we saw originally. Everything around the car was built purely for performance, nothing really too much being considered towards the ergonomics. As we go through, we can see sort of a generic look, I would almost say, to the vehicle itself. Stunning nonetheless, but I wouldn't say necessarily that it screamed Aston Martin. It's now the job of the designer to take this almost flawless package and give it character, give it personality, give it spirit, give it almost a sense of life. So my first impression on looking at this car from a front three-quarter view is one of absolutely striking proportions. A wonderful combination of engineering and design. The two are marrying themselves in a very, very gorgeous way, I would say. Now, the first point that my eye is drawn to is to that massive grille in the front of this car, which incorporates that S-curve that we often see with Aston Martin grilles. And then the next thing that I start to notice as I go along the front fender and towards the sides is almost an orchestral symphony of curves of different parts of a band, of an orchestra playing together. They're all working together. I mean, there is room obviously for doing things a little bit differently here, but they all strike the same chord. They all seem to be speaking to each other. Now, as I've moved my eyes slightly upwards and back to the front, the headlamp looks perhaps a little bit too normal. As we come towards the rear fender, there's that zigzag almost shape that typically seems to be in vogue today. The canopy is quite interesting. I love the snorkel design on the top simply because it's purposeful engineering and they've sculpted it in a way that looks quite organic. I'm sure it does the job. Now, as you come to the middle of the door and downwards, you can see that that area is probably taking a back seat in design, and aerodynamics is taking over because you can see that they're controlling the air quite tightly and quite specifically in that area. So zooming out, I'm incredibly inspired to sketch out, along with my analysis, some of the parts of this car to see what kind of solutions I would have come up with to make an exciting design, at least as exciting as this one. Now, the first thing I would readdress is the front grille. The front grille is obviously interpreting what we all recognize today as the Aston Martin grille. It has that nice swoop here and running straight and then swooping again. I think they refer to it as a S-type shape. The problem or the issue for me, I think, is the exaggerated extension on the side. So it's almost quite like a very large mouth bottom feeder, if you know what I mean. So I would prefer to see it a little bit less wide, a little bit more controlled, not extending so far outwards. Another challenge, I think, would be to address the headlights, something that still matches the design, but not so blobby, as you can see here. The mirrors, in my opinion, are a little bit of an outdated type of technology in comparison with the rest of this vehicle. A little bit sad for me, a little bit of a letdown for me to see something so traditional. What I do like on the front is the absence of the windscreen wipers. I hope it stays like that. So that's about all I would do on the front end, as it's a gorgeous design. Still looks like an Aston Martin on first sighting, but like I said, a few elements that I would tend to add a little bit more either control or tension into them. Also, the blade design here for me, I think that's a little bit old-fashioned, and I think this vehicle could merit a bit more attention to detail in the slat area. So we'll see how we can improve that. Now, one piece of extremely clever engineering and design is the absence of any cut lines on the surface of the hood or of the bonnet, separating it from the fender. This is what we call a clamshell design, and I'm one of the big believers in using clamshells. It makes this all one piece. And again, I would imagine that even this part here on the lower part of the fender, what we would think is the fender, is part of the clamshell. So that is fantastic. I love that because it's a good way to address fit and finish and tolerances and gaps. We get rid of them and we don't have to worry about them. It's a very consistent piece of design. I love the flushness of the headlamps. They've got that down very well. There's a cleanliness to the design of this car that almost looks like you can't really improve it any more than it is. And again, it's down to the construction, the engineering, and that combination of marrying the engineering with the aesthetics in a beautiful way. So that absence of cut lines through the hood or connecting the hood to the fender is absolutely positive and beautiful for me. So those of you who watch this channel will know that I'm an absolute critic and quite OCD on even the smallest details, but the fact that I would only change these small elements that are almost not even critical, but are details, shows you how much I believe that this design is beautiful and incredibly well engineered. Now, moving on to the side, there are a few things on the side of the car that I perhaps would readdress, and whether or not it's going to look better is obviously, design is subjective, but I'm not going to mess with the aerodynamics. I'm only going to address the aesthetic side of it in a way that perhaps would not mess with the aerodynamics. So the first thing I would do is, looking at it from a side view, think about the proportions, because that's where we really judge them. I think the car sits extremely well between the wheels, and then you've got the nice hip flow coming down. This is definitely a small sort of low car. That rear end is probably quite low when you walk up to it. It's a lot lower than it looks like in the photographs, I'm sure, but there's a lot going on in terms of aero in this area here, and obviously in the diffuser area. And look at how it all joins together on the bottom of the car. Now, I know the MC20 had an issue that I was speaking about, the top being organic, the lower side being very technical, very disjointed. So the objective here for me would be to see how we could join the sculpted area on the top that looks very influenced by air going over the surfaces, and combining that look with the look underneath where the air is actually going through the surfaces. You're mixing two languages together. You're getting sort of a disjoint from my point of view. So for example, this area here that kind of doesn't work with the rest of the car, it really draws your eye into it. It looks like the most complicated piece on the vehicle almost, because there's a lot going on underneath, inside, back out, some diverse angles here that you have to get used to because they're not being repeated anywhere else. I think there might be better ways to address this in order to simplify it. If we were able to remove that piece there, for example, you'll have a much cleaner surface flowing through just below the belt line or the waistline of the car into the bonnet area. And this gap, which you can see here, would just move up into this area here. The spear going through here is a beautiful shape. It softens towards the rear, tightens as it comes forward. That gives you a real sense of dynamicness, of tension to the body side. But what I would probably do is pull this line up and come very close, or either join it almost to that axis there, that line there, and just let the air come out through there. The other thing I want to readdress is a little bit of the dynamic stance of the vehicle. We're looking at lines here that might have a direction, but I think we can improve it. This shape here going through here and this underneath section of the sill panel, very purposely designed, but perhaps there's a way to introduce something, like I said, that combines the two halves of the car better. Now moving to the rear, I like the floating wing concept here. That works excellent, very dynamic. I understand that we're speaking in this area about heat soak, thermal dissipation, heat shields in this area here around the exhaust. The slats are working great through here to get the heat out, look very dynamic. One thing I absolutely love is ending the body color behind the rear wheel high up so that exposes a lot of the rear tire section, so it looks more wide, much more aggressive. They haven't brought it down typically like a lot of cars do to a lower area here. So by lifting it, it gives it that sort of minimal rear end look to the vehicle. That's fantastic. So with this diffuser here, there's obviously a synergy between the Aston Martin racing team and the designers on the Valhalla, because there's a lot going on there that is meant to glue the car to the road. Not much you would want to touch in this area here because it is a definite statement of aero intent. Now, in my view, consistency can be a good thing, but it can also be interpreted to be almost too expected. Now, what I would probably have done on the slats here, where the heat evacuates, is introduce a little bit of variation. In other words, the slats perhaps start large and reduce in size as they get towards the rear. That in itself is not a huge change, but it does add a little bit more of a dynamic look to this area here. Probably just as effective as we're looking at of what these are doing here, just addressed in a way that gives it a little bit more, say, attention to detail. Now, I love the way that Aston Martin is addressing the taillights here. It's adding on top of the character that they've shown us with the Valkyrie, a new way of designing taillights, perhaps something very unique. And there, for example, the designer has the liberty to inject a little bit of his emotional side to it, providing a taillight design that does the job, looks unique, adds character to the vehicle, and is unmistakably of the brand. And so they've done a great job with the taillights. I like it. I love the purposefulness of the snorkel on the top. Designed very well, integrated, probably minimal, but doing what it has to do. One subject I want to touch on, which I haven't really addressed too often in the past, is the wheel design. Now, I feel that the wheels on the Aston Martin Valhalla are beautiful. They're light. You're looking at something that appears to be a 6-spoke design, when in reality, the black parts of the wheel are blacked out in a sense to make them fall away or disappear. The issue I have with the wheels on the Valhalla is that cardinal sin, I call it, of doing even number spokes. I've always felt that wheels have to have an odd number of spokes because that typically makes the wheel look like it's in movement. The moment you go to an even number of spokes, as we see here in the Valhalla, it becomes something static looking. It doesn't look like it's weighted or rotating. It just looks almost fixed and not moving. So that is the problem when you do 6 spokes, as opposed to, for example, 5 spokes, where you would have something like that, for example, that looks already like it's in movement. And lastly, on the design of the rear part of the car, one area which I would probably readdress because of the importance of it, of the technicality of the design, is the heat shield that we see around the exhaust pipe in this critical area here. We need heat shields because they have to transfer the heat away from critical elements. Looking at the way they've done this here, I'm sure that's probably an aluminum plate, or perhaps it's ceramic coated. But the fact is that this piece here potentially could be accented or emphasized for its qualities or its purpose. I think if we looked at something perhaps like Avcoat, which is a material that was used by NASA, Avcoat could be a very nice looking element of material in this area here. So we'll look at readdressing what we could do here to give it that special wow factor, that special, what is that? I've never seen that look before. All in all, the highest compliment that I can give to this car is that I think it is the car that I would choose in this segment. It has a few rivals, most notably perhaps the SF90 from Ferrari, but for me, this car is pushing innovation in every direction. And for me, that makes it highly desirable because although it's pushing those boundaries, it still looks like an Aston Martin, and it perfectly answers the question of where are we moving to in the future of the hypercar and the supercar segment. Now we come to the point of the episode where I have to give the car a rating. I rate this car highly. I would give it a 9.91, slightly higher than the Bugatti Bolide because I love sensual design and the Valhalla has it in spades. So, what do you think? Do you agree with me that Aston Martin has another hit in their portfolio, or maybe not? Let me know in the comments below. I'll look forward to reading them. Don't forget, you can get your Frank Stephenson t-shirts from the link in the description below. Thanks so much for everybody who's ordered one. I look forward to seeing them out there, and I also look forward to seeing you in the next episode.